Hey guys, I'm Matt Lighty, and this is going to be a two-part video where I basically go over and review all of the 16 different uniques that were added in this Settlers expansion, including the Settlers League and then the base uniques, and such as tinctures and ritual, etc. So for the first part of this video, we're going to talk about the actual Settler League uniques that are broken into a couple different categories. You basically have the uniques from the bosses. So that's things like Svalinn from the Black Knight, Living Blade from the Bandit Lord Sasan, and then you have Admiral's Arrogance from the Admiral, which you interact with in shipping, and then Living Blade is from the mappers being interrupted, and Svalinn is from endgame mapping in instances. Both Living Blade and Admiral's Arrogance are one-time encounters with one portals, and then for some reason Svalinn, you have unlimited attempts to fight the Black Knight, as when you die, you exit the instance, not the map, so you could just keep on tossing 10% down the drain. The other uniques being Ynda's stand and Serle's masterwork, or Serle's masterwork. These come from shipping and filling quotas from Calgar sections, and then Kaom's command and Tawhoa's filling come from quota filling in the Karui sections. So that's where the 7 uniques come from. We're actually going to go over them as far as their applications and, people are using them and what kind of stuff people are using them for. We'll just kind of start in order they're appearing here, and that's Ynda Stands, which is a belt. It is a studded belt, so it's a bad base, meaning that it's prone to be corrupted to try to get any better implicit. Examples of better implicits could be all res, percent stats, or XY effect during flask effect. Its actual stats are decent. It has a non-negligible amount of life regen, I would say. A little bit of res, but its key feature is the gaining ward instead of 50% of armor and evasion. Note it's not armor evasion in ES, just armor evasion, and it's gaining ward instead of, not gaining ward on the value. Meaning if you had a body armor that gave you 8,000 armor, this would make it so you have 8,000, instead of 8,000 armor, you'd have 4,000 armor, and then 4,000 ward, so half of that is being added, I believe, is how it functions. Good to note that tempering catalysts do scale up that amount, so it's a large chunk. Ynda Stand is currently being used by 0.9% of the population of high-end builds, being the top roughly 100,000 builds. Of the people using Ynda Stands, a decent chunk, I imagine, are doing so in conjunction with a body armor that offers high armor or evasion. So look at some examples of that. Here's a guy just using one on a full dragon scale just to get some sick value. It's about 1,500 give or take ward. And don't forget, the ward buff, the buff 2 ward, means its recoup time has been cut significantly down to a 2-second recoup from a 4-second. So ward eats a chunk of a hit, and then after a couple seconds just comes back. So it's a huge amount of defense for all those times that you don't normally actually get hit. So if you're evading or you're blocking, it's not touching your ward. So that's when ward comes really in handy. So it's a great, like, kind of passive oh shit button for big hits. Very commonly used in conjunction with another one on our list, Svalinn, because it gives you lucky blocks, so reaching large amounts of block means that when they do bypass the block, boom, they're hitting that ward instead. Nice chunk. Here's one on a Death Oath build, Death Oath being a large amount of armor. Most of the high-end armor evasion bodies did get pretty large amounts of flat because of the change to quality, the change to the base type, so a lot of these armors are just like way chunkier than before. Now, 94% of the players using Ynda Stand are using rare bodies, but you can actually check here by doing the opposite and seeing what sort of unique bodies people are using. So here's a cool one being Bronze Lith. There's a good amount of evasion to eat into the Yndas. Obvious choice here in Brass Dome, that 4,700 armor. Big chunk of that turning into ward. Someone's got a Doriani's, a very, very small amount of ward in comparison, but still like a non-negligible amount. I would say getting to 1,000 ward is kind of the benchmark for where I would start to give a shit. So as long as you can get about 1,000 ward from this, or maybe with this in conjunction with something like Svalinn that does have a little bit of ward, getting to that 1,000 ward amount is like a pretty nice little defensive build. So overall, I think Ynda's is a pretty good unique. It's got some decent application. It's quite rare to acquire. Being it's a quota unique, its value in trade is probably negligible, but again, it's something because it's on a bad base being studded, you're going to be corrupting them quite commonly, so hopefully we see it added to the base game as a nice addition to belts, as the belt slot is obviously highly controlled by basically 1 or 2 belts. So the more mid-tier belts, the better. So next on the list is Svalinn, which I would say unequivocally is the best item added in Settlers League. Not even the league, but the patch in general. This shield is so good. I don't think I wouldn't put it in the category of being like too strong. Like, it's not as strong as a Mage Blood or something like that. Its application is like just very broad, but still quite niche, because it's going to be used on a build that obviously uses the shield, and what it offers is a very large amount of decent mitigation for pretty minimal investment. So you could kind of slap a Svalinn on many builds, especially just utilizing the fact that it gives you just chance to block is lucky, which is kind of artificially doubling your block chance. Meaning once you get to about 50% chance to block, you're kind of at block cap, you know, or like I have a 100% chance to block. It comes with some spell blocks, so typically it's used in conjunction with things like Red Nightmare, and maybe like 8 to 10 points on tree to give you pretty much cap block artificially. And it auto-triggering elemental spells means you can put a lot of cool utility things in there, like Frozen Aegis and Wave of Conviction and stuff like that. So this is, I would say, probably the most popular, being 18% of the population is using Svalinn. Of the top 100,000 people, about 18,000 of them. And again, its application is extremely wide. You will see this being used on a plethora of builds because slapping it on gives you a huge amount of defenses. Now, it does have a very small amount of life, which is negligible, I would say. So its implicit is best to be replaced by something like Fizz Taken As, or maybe a gem level. However, its amount of ward, being small, is not non-negligible because there's a lot of nodes on tree that scale global defenses or defenses with a shield, and ward is a global defense, ward is a defense on the shield, so that value also does get scaled up. If you were to get 100% increased defenses from shield, this would give you roughly 300 ward, which is leaning towards a non-negligible amount of mitigation, just a little chip mitigation. Considering the fact that Svalinn itself gives you basically cap block for a pretty minimal investment, it's hard to beat in that regard. You'll see it on melee builds, caster builds, summoners. Here's an example of a pretty common setup in the shields thing. So Flame Wall, Sigil of Power, Hydrosphere. Again, they have to have elemental tags to be usable for that triggering effect, but some people just put in whatever and just kind of call it a day. You'll see a lot of people putting in things like the Sanctuary Cluster. This is like giving you double dip value, right? So these nodes that give 4% are effectively giving 8%, right? Because the lucky blocks, it's twice as effective, the amount to block. And you'll just see the shield and everything. I'm personally using it on my Archmage build, but you'll see it on builds. Like just to showcase, this is like what would be a hyper endgame build using things like Nimbus, Original Sin, Mage Blood, and they're using a Svalinn because it really is just that good to give you an amount of defense. If it was added to the base game, it would be more like a tier 1 than a tier 0. I would say its relevancy in the game now is probably similar to where other shields of a kind of similar vibe, such as an Aegis Aurora, have been dominant in that same spot in the past. Things like Aegis Aurora, things like Dawnbreaker have been as good as this is and as widely applicable at points in time. So I don't think it's inherently stronger than that. I think you could do something as simple, you know, as maybe just remove the ward from the shield. And that would be fine to be tier 1. If you're going to introduce, I would rather it be introduced in the game as a tier 0 rarity. Like, I think a Squire overall is way stronger. The high-end potential of a Squire is a lot higher than a Svalinn. But does there to be a T0 base unique? Probably not. I would say more like a tier 1. I think it fits the tier 1 spot nicely. It's a very good shield, but especially in the league where they added, you know, enchants to things like runic enchants to things like wands, where you can have double haunted, you know, the value of this Svalinn kind of falls off. But in a build like this, where you're getting such high damage from your rings, clear, and a lot of your defenses can maybe a little bit fall short, slapping on a Svalinn makes a build that wasn't that tanky significantly more tanky for very minimal investment. That's kind of the beauty of the Svalinn, is a couple block nodes here and there, maybe an anoint or something, and boom, you've got yourself a pretty noticeable amount of defenses coming from one shield. So I think that is by far the best unique, and we're going to come from Svalinn into what is, without question, the worst unique. from this entire patch, let alone the league subset we're looking at now, which is Living Blade. Now, Living Blade is a two-hand Ezomite sword that has really good attack speed, almost 1 point on attack speed, can be enchanted hypothetically right with Harvest to get a little bit more attack speed. Can't be poisoned, which is worse than unaffected by poisoned. If you could have any sort of buff on you, but not doing something to you, it's always better because there's ways to take advantage of being poisoned versus just cannot be affected by poison, but that's fine. It's fantastic in that regard. The big to-do about this is you can have an additional tincture. Now, tinctures are really good. Without question, tinctures are good. The line below it, removing mana burn on kill, would be good if it was 100% or maybe 10% chance on hit to remove mana burn, but 10% on kill is like such a flimsy amount that it's like you wouldn't want to build it around, and the weapon just isn't nearly good enough to merit the upside of an additional tincture, because 3 tinctures isn't that much better than 2 tinctures. A lot of the tinctures don't work too well in conjunction. You can have things like an elemental tincture and a crit tincture, but that third tincture doesn't really have much of a function at the moment, I feel like. I've looked at this extensively, and you could always look at something and see, you know, if people even using it, because people in trade will use any sort of fucking wackadoodle item. So when you click on an item in trade and see literally 3 characters out of 110,000, you're kind of thinking, all right, what the hell is going on here? Now, this guy, I'm near positive, has this item in their weapon swap, so that's not real. This person looks like they are actually using it, and they're using it in a smart way, and that is, this weapon does no damage, right? So it has fast attack speed. Cool, so we could do something with flat elemental application. Boom, LE hit, makes perfect sense. It's dirt cheap, so let's get a free Fortify Corruption on it. All right, makes sense. Now, what do we do for 3 tinctures? Okay, we have the pen one. That's the one I named with pen crit. Makes sense. There's the elemental one. So what's the third one? Rage, because it has to be a thing that's an attack scaling build. So incredibly narrow in its application. And ultimately, because you're using a unique weapon in Settlers League, it can't be enchanted, which already makes it kind of fucking worthless. Like, your weapons that are uniques have to be so good to be worth using in this league where you can't enchant uniques, because the enchants on some of them, especially things like a 2-hand LE sword build, when one of the enchants is double damage, is so good. So yeah, I would say this basically item is currently unusable, effectively. People are trying to use it, but it's unusable. This guy's trying to do a crit poison build. You know, and God bless for him trying. But I think that we have to just wait for more tinctures to be added to the game to maybe this thing have any sort of relevance. You know, honestly, it could just say, instead of having an additional tincture, it could say you can have up to 5 tinctures. And it wouldn't make a difference. Like, 3 is as good as 5. There's no, you know, like, this guy's playing the most build of all builds here. And if he had 4 tinctures or 5, would it make a difference? No, you wouldn't use them. Like, that's why there's just not enough tinctures. So we get these uniques added to the game sometimes where it's like, this is a very unique, and for that reason, it's good as being a unique. But in its current state, it basically has no use in the game. And that's okay. It's just not that good at the moment. And maybe eventually it'll become relevant when more tinctures get added, when more unique tinctures get added. There could be some combination of 3 unique tinctures that, like, break the item. But as of now, yeah, it's basically a fucking turd. Next up we have Tawhoa's Felling. 2-hand pile driver. Slammer strike weapon. The cool thing I would say about it is what it does is it gives you a basically spell echo for an attack. When you do an attack with like a 1-second cooldown, this thing's gonna summon a dude that's gonna copy your strike or slam. So if you bone shatter, your thing's gonna pop up a bone shatter the same way you do it, with the same links and the same setups, etc. Or if you slam, it'll do a slam. It's got pretty okay damage, I guess, right? And it has some stats that are relevant, but yeah, it's not great damage-wise for a 2-hand. It's about half to a third as good as you can get. Now, but again, you're doing 2 hits, so that's fun. It's used a little bit, like very, very little, I would say. People have done it more than Living Blade. 28 characters in trade, because again, there's no reason to use it, you know, when there's just rares are way better. but it's in a way offering an additional amount of clear because it's just doubling you every second. So if you're doing like a slow slammer, like a ground slam of earth shaking or a snaking, so something like this ground slam of earth breaking guy or a volcanic snaking, it's just like a nice chunk of clear. If you don't really need the damage, you feel like you're maybe just doing like tier 16s or low tier 17 difficulty mapping, it's going to double your clear and give you decent damage. And again, it's a very common cheap unique, so corrupting it also is common and cheap. You could get some nice things like this one has inspiration and a little bit more fizz on it. But it's a fun weapon. It has 3D art. It's not particularly good, like a rare is just better. But having a dude pop up and do the same thing you do is kind of just like fun. It's like you're having a friend. You could map with a buddy. The cool part, I would say, is for things like chieftains that get that additional benefit from their ascendancy, where they have it so socketed things in your body get supported by Ancestral Call, Fist of War, right? That's going to apply to your body armor. You don't have to have your gems in your weapon to get the benefit of the triggering the level 20 Tawhoa's Chosen. That just triggers on attack with a 1 second cooldown, basically. You can get your little artificial 7 leak by being a chieftain and still get the benefit of the dude popping up and doing it with all the fixings. He just literally it's like the mirrored reflections. They're copying your attack. So very fun, unique. I think it's totally acceptable to use as a weapon for perpetuity for basic red map type stuff. But it's not good enough to really use, you know, forever. It's way worse than a rare. Substantially worse than a rare. But a perfectly suited unique, especially considering it's actually level 61. So it's not like a high level. It isn't a good base being pile driver. Pretty B plus middle of the road unique. Fun, but nothing too absurd. If it was added to the game, I would say you could put it at like tier 2. Maybe about like around Tidebreaker. Tidebreaker is about as good as it, give or take. So for relevance, there you go. Serle's masterwork. Now, this is a bit of an awkward item. You've heard me say in this video that the downside of using unique weapons in Calgar League is you can't enchant them. Well, this can be enchanted. Now, it says, people misunderstand this weapon, that's step number 1 problem. Can be enchanted. Okay, so that means you can have 1 enchant. Can have 2 additional enchants. So that means in total, this thing can have 3 enchants. The problem is, the builds that want to utilize this for multiple enchants are quite specific, and the very popularized ones that were using this were things like strength stacking builds, because it has no damage, no attack, but it has shit stats, right? So what set of enchants in combination can you use that make this thing really, really pop off? Okay, there are a couple. You can use any of the one-hand enchanting things. It ignores the categories, right? Any one-hand melee weapon. So the ones that were being used are the Val, where is it? The Val Prevention, have 100% reduced soul gain prevention duration. This lets you have 100% uptime of Val skills. So think of things like Val Lightning Strike or Val Volcanic Fissures, the popular one for this one, right? So that's the one. The other one you put on is things like Chaos Damage with hits is lucky. Volcanic Fissures a hit. You do a Strength Stacking Alberon's build, now all your damage is lucky. So now you have 100% uptime of Val Lightning Strikes, Val Volcanic Fissures, and all your damage is lucky. So you could even throw in the third one that does, you know, whatever else you want on top of all that. But that's just an example of like those 2 combinations, right, is what makes it so strong. Is you can have these sort of things on it that give it this crazy amount of value. Now, here's the real problem. Is playing a build with this sort of weapon, like giving things like your life leech is instant on top of all that, or, you know, something else crazy like attacks cost mana, so you don't have to do with mana cost or whatever, right? All these things, like in total, these sort of crafts are multiple power runes. So some of the builds were using up to 30 power runes to make this item work, and therein lies the problem, is it's just ridiculously expensive. Now, the second part is you're building something ridiculously expensive for a meme, and the second this item rotates out in the league ends, it's basically a dead item if not enchanted, because we have no way of currently runesmithing enchants outside of just this league. So if this league ends and runesmithing ends with it, this item does absolutely fucking nothing for perpetuity. So kind of a meme there. All right, so in trade we have about 34 people using it, and again, that makes sense. because a lot of the applications for something like this are custom mirror. Now, this is the sort of build I was just describing, okay? This is using the Val Volcanic Fissure as I described it. Oh, it's literally identical to pretty much what I just said. So it's the chaos damage is lucky, it's the soul gain prevention, it's the instant leech. Crazy. Like, that's insane value. It means you have 100% uptime of Val Volcanic Fissure, and this guy's using a Squire setup to have it just kind of pop off for perpetuity. In conjunction with things like Hate Forge, Nimbus to have the things go random in return for the explosions. There's your Alberons for all your damage. I mean, this is like a real end-of-league currency sink build. And, you know, an amount of power runes to do something like this, and the rest of the framework to do it is like just super high-end. Most people aren't going to have some sort of crazy high-end setup like that. You know, this guy could be using it for something different. I don't know if I can check his enchants. Sometimes not showing up, which is annoying. So here's a support using one for 100% uptime of things like Val Haste and Val Discipline. That's another application right there. This guy's got it for a similar thing. He's doing a dual wield Cyclone setup. He just has the lucky damage, free melee fortify, additional range. Pretty insane value. This dude's playing like a one of the auto trigger detonate dead type builds of the scavenging ones, but he's using it to give himself full large ignite application through the masterwork. So killing ignited enemies inflicts equivalent ignites on nearby, so it's like free mass prolif. Very cool application there. This guy's doing some Aurabot shenanigans with triggering socketed Val skills or fire spells on hit with Val skill prevention, giving him 100% uptime seemingly of Val Molten Shell to give a mass amount of defenses. So really sneaky little cool application right there from this Aurabot type guy. Here's another cool one. This guy is doing a trauma stacking Juggernaut, getting all the flat from trauma, right? Giving himself free splash and free melee range from the enchants to give himself a little bit extra oomph. But yeah, that's the masterwork. A lot of cool applications. The problem being, again, is just most of them are pretty expensive because the runes are very expensive, especially power runes. So it's just a bummer. And when the league ends, the item kind of dies unless there's some sort of other support. But overall, pretty cool item. A lot of fun, you know, combinations. I guess just the biggest shame is that we weren't able to really play around with it because it's just so expensive to try to make something with a triple enchant, especially if those things use power runes. Next is Admiral's Arrogance. This is a fantastic glove off the Admiral. It has a little bit of attack speed, some armor, but the big thing I would say, aside from just the +3 levels of all melee skills, which is cool, is that it gives you rage up to your max amount of rage when you would gain rage. So if you have any amount of rage on hit, instead of gaining 1, you gain your cap. That's the big draw. Now, this is used with a lot of fun Rage Vortex builds, not to mention just regular cool builds. 3% of the population, putting in about 2,700 players. Wide variety of usage, though. So here's a guy doing it with just a little amount of rage on hit to give him cap rage in most circumstances. And again, it's a very cheap glove, so popular with double corrupts looking for things like plus gems and a curse. He's using his plus gems to give him a more zonked out enhance. Very, very cool there. This one has it just for base rage application. Some people will use it in conjunction with Berserk to get some extra value, so it's like some sort of perpetual Berserk engine. Here's a guy using a Berserk setup, also fished for a +1 frenzy charge. Very nice. One of the cool builds people are using it with is Rage Vortex of Berserking. This is a Rage Vortex that is actually hemorrhaging your amount of rage, sets it aside, and then does it around you, kind of like a Blade Vortex, but you're losing rage perpetually, flat amount per second, and also an increased rage loss rate. So you'll always lose an amount, but this makes it so, you know, you could go to 1 rage and shoot right back up to cap because the gloves have it. So when you're hitting that frequently, you're just regaining your cap. So it's just like a great glove for not only maintaining rage or in a boss fight, always getting your rage back to full really quickly, but in a circumstance where you're doing a Rage Vortex of Berserking, you know, whether you're getting tons of flat damage from this example, you have something like an Alberon's Original Sin setup with some sort of fire strength scaling, that whole thing, more damage from that Rage Vortex, just keep it up all the time. It does a great job of just keeping it going. And you'll just see it used on pretty much generic attack builds because, again, it's a glove. If you're looking for a frenzy charge, if you're looking for a curse or a plus gem, it's a dirt cheap glove. And realistically, the rolls don't matter. Most melee skills don't scale too highly off of levels, so that kind of roll is irrelevant. and the chance being 10 to 20 is effectively the same thing for how frequent most attack builds are hitting anyway. So getting base crit for a COC build, or getting a charge, or getting a gem level to do some sort of sneaky shit. This one is both. Yeah, it's great for that. So fantastic glove. Would love to see it in the base game. Probably would put it at around, you know, tier, I guess 3 or 4. Probably about as strong as Tawhoa's, or maybe something, maybe more like a Thunder Fist in its application, so maybe like a tier 1 or 2. But yeah, great glove. Look forward to seeing it in the base game if they're going to add it. Fantastic, unique. Always good to have more gloves because it's that corruption bait. You want to be removing uniques from the game at a rate you're adding them, so double corrupt away. Now, finally, from this League of the Patch, Kaom's Command, which is a siege helmet, has a little bit of life, some Warcry speed, which is really good. Basically, cast speed for Warcries. And Warcry have increased AoE, which is nice, but the big thing is it explodes corpses when you Warcry, dealing 5 to 10. Now, you should know from explosions, if you just, as a baseline, if you're exploding something for 5 or 10% of the life, that's killing everything on screen. Most things have so much life, especially rares, that when you detonate them, pretty much everything dies from the flat damage. So this has some really nice use, I would say, because of the auto Warcry popularity, the Warcry build popularity with slam builds. So I wouldn't be surprised if this actually has decent representation. Kaom's Command, and it does not. Yeah, I mean, it's good, but it has clunk with it. So this one is using it just with seismic setup there. They have a big multi-slam setup that's auto-exerting. Every time you hit an auto-exert, one of these things is blowing up. Some people I could see doing some sort of corpse generation with it, but that seems kind of jank. I don't know. I would like put in like a corpse walker setup. I doubt. Oh, there's some. Half of them are doing corpse walker setups. Look at that. So they're just walking and then detonating the corpses with Kaom's Command. So that might be a little bit of a build subsection of its own. Hey, look, there's Svalinn again. God bless. But yeah, the Warcry speed's nice. The AoE is nice. The life is nice. No res. Bummer. Decent, I guess, ish armor. The explosions are cool. Helm's awkward for corrupting, but it's free explosions, especially with a Corpse Walker build. I could see it in a build like a Death's Oath. This is just like a walking sim build. Like there's, zero attempt to really get anything done here. They're even using a enchant setup to have very high uptime of Val Cyclone and Val Breach in conjunction with the Corpse Walkers and the Kaom's Command to just blow things up around them. So there's a little bit of meme tech going on there. But yeah, it's, all it takes is one auto-exert setup. Like here's auto-exertion plus General's Cry, which is triggering so frequently that pretty much every second or two you're going to have detonations going off from your Corpse Walkers in conjunction with the Kaom's Command. So a little bit of tech, a little bit of tech there, but overall it's a pretty cool helmet. Nothing too special. Its introduction to the game doesn't enable anything, I would say, aside from this minor tech. You could just slap it on a slam build for just a little bit of additional clear from auto-exerting, but aside from that, nothing special. It's always good to have new Kaom's uniques. So if you have a Kaom's unique strongbox, this should be able to drop from that if it was added to the base game, hypothetically. Currently, it's obviously a shipping quota unique reward, but it's cool. Eventually, we're going to have the entire Kaom set. That's the dream, right? Full Kaom's RP. But that's it. So that's the basically review of all of the 7 uniques in the Settlers League in Path of Exile. Look forward to seeing some new applications of these uniques if they get added to the base game, or we see some sort of introduction to Settlers in the base game next patch. But as of now, again, to recap very quickly, Living Blade, basically unusable. Tao's Felling, minor application, mostly just an okay two-hand weapon. Kaom's minor application, some tech with Corpse Walkers, but basically just an okay way of introducing some explosions. Serle's Masterwork, really cool with enchants, very expensive because of some enchants, and extremely niche application. But the big one I would say is the lucky chaos damage and the Val skill reduction to have 100% uptime. That's the big draw, I would say, for that. Ynda stand, great way of getting a decent belt with decent stats that give you a perfectly nice chunk of ward. So if you're using an armor that has at least 3,000 armor and evasion, and you don't need your belt slot, slap on a Ynda's belt, get a huge chunk of ward. Feels good there. Admiral's Arrogance, a great way of just, if you want to stay at cap rage, this will do it. And it's, very common glove, so it's corruption bait. Very easy to corrupt it. Same with Ynda's corruption bait. Feel free to double corrupt them away. They don't cost that much, and the rolls don't really matter too much. So, yeah, and you can catalyze Yndas. You could corrupt these arrogances for frenzy charges or gem things, and that's great. And Living Blade is unusable at the moment. Actually an unusable weapon, I would say right now. The benefit of having a third tincture over a second tincture is incredibly small, but with the introduction of maybe more unique tinctures and more tinctures in general, more tincture support, maybe God, maybe it'll be useful. But the fact that the mana burn on kill doesn't work on bosses means it's already like pretty bad. I think it's really easy to add another line that just says 10% to remove 1 mana burn on hitting a unique or rare. That would make this immediately way better and possibly usable. But without question, I would say breakaway and most popular unique in this league is Svalinn. It's not doing anything I would classify as OP. People might disagree with that, but you know, I've played this game literally since the closed beta, since the inception. I've seen every item that has been introduced in this game in its entirety, every life cycle it's ever had. And there's been shields that have dominated the meta more than Svalinn is currently being used now. The real basic comparison is Aegis Aurora. The height of Aegis Aurora, and it's perfectly good now, was way higher than Svalinn. You know, not to mention things like Prism Guardian or Dawnbreaker being really good, or Squire. So Svalinn, very good shield. Definitely T1 stamp of approval. I think we should just add it to the base game at the same rate as an Aegis Aurora, because it's very similar in how it works. Svalinn's easier to just slap into a build, and it requires less investment to be good, but the height of, I think, Aegis Aurora is way higher. Svalinn is never going to give you effective immortality. Aegis Aurora can. They're just different, but I think they're pretty similar to compare. So, but it's definitely the best unique in the league. So, and it's nice that it's also the one you get from mapping, because mapping is better than everything. So, fantastic. But yeah, that's it. 7 settler uniques. There they are. In the second part of this little video series thing, we'll look at the non-settler uniques. So things like the tinctures or things like the ritual items. We'll take a look at those bad boys in the next video.